Was jetzt vor allem im 20. Jahrhundert mit der Elektrizität und der Informationstechnik sehr, sehr wichtig wird, ist nochmal ein bisschen was anderes, das ist die Probabilistik. Und die Probabilistik, ja, die will, ich glaube, so könnte man das in dieser Linie darstellen, mit Prognosen planen und die Projektivität selbst mit thematisieren. Also ganz konkret würde man in der Probabilistik, macht man das, was man bei den Größen in der Stochastik, so wie ich es hier darstelle, einfach misst, macht man überzählbar, also über Daten, die man aufzeichnet, messbar. Das heißt, da kommt nochmal eine andere Zahlentheorie mit dazu und die Probabilistik ist, deswegen nenne ich sie Quantenmechanik, weil sie konstituierend ist für den elektrischen Strom und eben für die Informationstechnik. Was jeweils zwischen, deswegen muss man das trennen, dazwischen liegt, sind immer Abstraktionsstufen. Ja? Abstraktionsstufen ähnlich wie wir das gehabt haben mit den Zahlen. Also mit den reellen Zahlen ist man abstrakter als mit den rationalen. Mit den rationalen ist man abstrakter als mit den natürlichen. In den rationalen sind die natürlichen aufgehoben, aber umgekehrt nicht. Mit den reellen ebenfalls. Mit den imaginären ebenfalls. Das sind solche Unterscheidungen, die mitspielen. Und jetzt können Sie sich vorstellen, wie man diese Statistik, von der der Corbusier spricht, er nennt sie, würde ich sagen, recht undifferenziert Statistik, wie man die jetzt versucht zu verstehen, aus welchem Paradigma heraus. Also quasi klassische Mechanik, Stochastik, man hat es mit den Größen zu tun, Statistik, man ist mit der Zählbarkeit, mit der Berechenbarkeit befasst, oder eben dieses Messbarmachen, was wir mit der Informationstechnik immer haben. Der Text erschließt sich Ihnen ganz anders, wenn Sie darauf achten. Ich will vor allem ein paar Statements, die aus dem Vorwort von Corbusier sind, anfügen, nicht um im Detail jetzt durchzugehen, wie genau sich das denn wirklich so analysieren lässt, sondern um Ihnen ein bisschen zu zeigen, dass man die Fragen, die er poetisch, das werden wir sehen, mit der Statistik zusammenbringt, wie man die verstehen kann, anders als ein Widerspruch. Also er sagt zum Beispiel, also es geht um die Stadt heute, das haben wir gesehen, obwohl es darum geht, sie für die Zukunft zu thematisieren. Aber die Zukunft darf nicht vorweg besetzt sein. Das heißt, er macht auch einen Unterschied zwischen in Bezug zur Produktivität, also eine Produktivität, die viel produziert, to produce much, und to produce well, also sophisticated production, also ein Fabrizieren, ein Herstellen, das nicht einfach nur mehr oder weniger ist, sondern mehr oder weniger gut ist oder differenziert ist oder komplex ist. Was auch sehr darauf hindeutet, dass er sich eigentlich eher in einem quantenmechanischen Denken bewegt, ist dieses Zitat ebenfalls aus dem Vorwort. Er sagt, Geometry is the mean created by ourselves. Ja, wenn man das sagt, ist da eine Relativität drin. Wenn man sagt, Geometrie ist nicht direkt die Natur, sondern es ist eine Sprache oder ein Zeichensystem oder eine Formalisierung, die von uns erfunden ist, dann ist man nicht mehr in der Welt von Newton, im Denken. Ja? Weiter sagt der Geometrie, so Geometry is created by ourselves, but it is also the foundation. Das heißt, das, was als Grundlage erachtet wird, kriegt eine andere Färbung damit. Der geht dann noch weiter und nennt dieses Mathematische, was er mit der Statistik, mit dem Quantitativen, mit den Zahlen feiert, das nennt er the noble choice. Ja, das ist eine noble heißt, es ist kompliziert, es ist nicht einfach so gegeben. Es hat was mit Kodexes, wir würden sagen mit Codes zu tun. Und die Maschinerie, von der er spricht, müsste man, denke ich, in Bezug zu diesem Verständnis von Mathematik lesen. Also er sagt, eine Maschine ist geometrisch, aber die Geometrie versteht er, wie wir sehen in diesen Zitaten, als etwas, was durchaus auch kreativ ist. Es gibt ein weiteres Zitat, ebenfalls, glaube ich, bin nicht sicher, ob das auch aus dem Vorwort ist, wo er sagt, Statistics are the Pegasus of the Town Planner. Pegasus ist das Sinnbild für die Dichtkunst. Pegasus ist das geflügelte Pferd, ja, haben Sie sicher schon oft gesehen. Und das steht für sowas wie eine mythische Quelle der Weisheit in der Kulturgeschichte. Nicht spezifisch bei ihm, aber er spricht von Statistik als dem. Das ist vollkommen invers zu der kalten, abstrakten, unpersönlichen Weise, Statistik zu verstehen. Heute meinen wir, wenn wir was statistisch darlegen, ist alles klar. Es gibt nichts zu diskutieren, es gibt nichts zu interpretieren. Er hat das ganz anders gedacht. Ein weiteres Zitat, er sagt, und hier wird es ein bisschen präziser mit diesem Größenbegriff, er sagt, Statistics give us an exact picture of our present state and also of former states. Das heißt sowas wie, er nennt es dann weiter unten, eine Art Rohmaterial, eine Art Datenrohmaterial. Und er sagt ganz klar, im Umgang jetzt mit Statistik, it needs a practical workman to convert raw materials. Das heißt, da ist eine Rolle vorgesehen, obwohl das so ein technisches Dispositiv ist, für den klassischen Beruf des Architekten. Zum Hintergrund, warum denn, wenn er das alles so denkt, warum denn überhaupt, why bother with statistics? Warum sollen wir dann überhaupt anfangen, in der Planung, in der Architektur, diese Technik mit einzubeziehen? Hier sind ein paar Hinweise darauf. Das eine ist, sehr interessant, er beschwert sich darüber, dass man einen Maschinenbegriff, dass man in seiner Zeit, und das war 1929, ja, einen Maschinenbegriff hat, der einem suggeriert, dass alles inextricably locked ist. Also so, wirklich wie ein Getriebe von einer klassischen mechanischen Maschine. Alles führt genau ineinander und ist geschlossen. In einer solchen Geschlossenheit kann man keine neuen Räume eröffnen. Das heißt, man kann eigentlich die Frage nach der Zukunft der Städte und die Frage des Planens hat gar keinen Platz innerhalb von Maschinerie. Ja, und er sagt, okay, we can only, any important advance can only come from without, aus einem Außen. Und dieses Außen, das versucht er zu thematisieren, das versucht er begreifbar zu machen. Er sagt, I mean to keep outside of all these petty facts. I refuse to interest myself in the struggle between the various interests. Jetzt hört sich das ja auf den ersten Blick sehr arrogant an, ja? Also alles verändert sich, Sie müssen sich vorstellen, das war eben 30er Jahre, Ende 20er Jahre, das heißt Industrialisierung, das heißt es gibt Infrastrukturen, völlig neue, es gibt Autos sind im Kommen, ganz wichtig in seinem Buch. Und damit verändert sich, was eine Stadt ist, wie die Zugänge sind, wie die Flüsse organisiert sind, alles ist im Begriff, in ein Infrastrukturparadigma, also Stadt über Infrastruktur zu denken. Und diese Infrastruktur, gegen die wehrt er sich, wenn er sagt, um die zu denken als Architekten, müssen wir eine Perspektive aus dem Außen finden. Wir können sie nicht von innerhalb einem Räderwerk für uns erschließen. Und um das zu entwickeln, ist es nötig, dass man von den konkreten Interessen, die quasi mechanisch von den einen so geplant sein wollen, von den anderen so, dass man dazu eine Distanz findet und die für sich einnimmt. Das heißt, wenn er sagt, diese konkreten Interessen, wo sich die unterschiedlichen Ideologien, Weltbilder, wo sich die streiten, interessiert mich nicht, dann ist das nicht so sehr, zumindest nicht nur, eine Ablehnung davon, sich mit der Komplexität dieses sozialen Wandels zu beschäftigen, sondern es ist getrieben von dem Interesse, einen Raum zu entwerfen, einen Denkraum, der auf der Höhe dieser Technik, auf der Höhe dessen, was diese Entwicklungen antreibt, also Logistik, Verkehr, Mobilität, der auf dieser Höhe die klassischen architektonischen Fragen stellen kann. So schreibt er dann auch, wie sagt er das? We have to work out an unbiased frame of mind, a conception of the future which shall be rational and simple, a thing both of utility and of beauty. Ja, also diese Rationalisierung, die Logistik, das Quantitative, das heißt für ihn dezidiert nicht, dass es nichts mehr mit Kunst zu tun haben soll. Dass die Architektur jetzt rein mathematisch berechenbar sein soll. Und er hat den schönen Satz, der, glaube ich, sehr schön zusammenfasst, wo er sagt, Statistics enable us to formulate our problem. Das ist das, was ich mit der Probabilistik gemeint habe. Also wenn wir uns auch fragen müssen, was messen wir denn und wie messen wir denn, dann sind wir in einer ähnlichen Situation, wie wir es mit dem Vortrag von Ludger Hovestadt und von Diana und Miro gesehen haben. Mit Google geht es eigentlich darum, dass wir Fragen stellen müssen. Es geht nicht mehr darum, wo finden wir die richtigen Antworten, sondern wir finden bessere oder schlechtere Antworten, je nachdem, wie wir zu fragen wissen. Das heißt, man kann lernen, etwas, was man noch nicht genau benennen kann, was es ist, wonach man sucht, also eine unvoreingenommene Zukünftigkeit oder sowas, das kann man lernen zu stellen. Und in diesem Sinn begreift er Statistik. Ein weiterer Punkt, den ich auch eigentlich nur kurz ansprechen möchte, er sagt, die Großstadt seiner Zeit ist eigentlich absurd. Die Großstadt seiner Zeit ist absurd, weil es keine Verhältnismäßigkeit mehr gibt. Das Beispiel, an dem er diese Diagramme zeichnet, er sagt, okay, sagen wir mal, die Zugänglichkeit, die Verkehrswege, die Mobilität ist für eine Stadt ein sehr großer Faktor, nennen wir es A. Und das zweite sind die komplexen sozialen Bedürfnisse der Leute, die in einer Stadt leben, nennen wir es B. Klassischerweise wäre das Verhältnis, muss es zwischen A und B ein Verhältnis geben, dieses Verhältnis wäre die alte Stadt. Mit diesen Veränderungen, auf die er reagiert, mit diesen Gedanken, gibt es plötzlich eine Diskrepanz. Und der eine Pol aus dieser Proportion wird riesengroß. Das heißt, er fliegt aus jeder Proportion raus. Und dieses Verhältnis, das nennt er absurd. Und absurd, wenn man das wörtlich nimmt, das ist auch interessant, hat was mit Stummsein zu tun. Also mit Geräuschen, die aus dem Stummsein ertönen. Das war mir nicht klar. Ich habe absurd immer gekannt als sinnlos, also unbegründbar. Ja, also das, was quasi abgründig ist. Aber dieses Abgründige, das ist nicht ein schwarzes Loch, weil es reinfällt, sondern wenn man den Wortsinn poetisch anschaut, ich weiß nicht, ob Sie das lesen können, das ist die Definition oben, dann heißt das auch, also nicht nur out of tune, discordant, foolish, silly, senseless, sondern es heißt auch ein Whisper, das aus einem, also surdus für dull, deaf, mute, für stumm. Und das ab, das ist ein Präfix, das heißt heraus, so das, was aus dem Stummen hervorkommt. Und das Interessante, und ich glaube, das passt sehr schön dann zu diesem Denken, was ich Ihnen versuche, ein bisschen schmackhaft zu machen, Corbusier mal nicht aus der klassischen Interpretationslinie zu denken, sondern mit diesem Interesse an der Probabilistik, an dem Quantenparadigma. Dann hat nämlich diese Metapher des Hörens, dessen, also das Absurde ist das, was aus dem Nichts ertönt oder so. Das hat dann immer, weil es Hören ist, zwei Seiten. Eines, das tönt, aber auch eine Seite, die empfangen kann, also die den Ton wahrnehmen kann. Auch das ist eine der grundlegenden Metapher für Signale, Signalhorizonte, Informationstechnik. Das ist kein Zufall, dass wir in der Informationstechnik immer von Signalen reden. Das war es schon von der vorbereitenden Rede. Jetzt freue ich mich sehr, unseren Gast zu begrüßen, Tobias Nolte. Und Emanuel wird ihn kurz vorstellen.
Tobias Nolte is the co-founder of Certain Measures, a studio which is based both in Boston and in Berlin. But before we go to Certain Measures, I'd like to introduce Tobias himself. So Tobias has a pretty, let's say, polymorphous trajectory, and I think it's interesting, again, for you to witness such practice and such a type of research in the very first year. So he works at the crossroad of research, of design, of construction, of engineering, but also of knowledge encapsulation and teaching. And Tobias Nolte studied in Berlin as well as Los Angeles, and he graduated in architecture at the Technical University in Berlin. So before he started his own business, which we'll hear more about in a minute, Tobias has occupied academic positions and professional positions in architectural offices, but also he worked for several years at Gehry Technology. And Gehry Technology is a firm that was initiated by Frank Gehry and his office almost 20 years ago now, maybe? Mm-hmm. And it's a firm that is specialized in architecture, in engineering, and in construction. And it works to support computational and technological developments in architectural projects through BIM, through web systems, and parametric design. And you first joined the Paris office, I think, were engaged with many different offices, extremely known, such as Zaha Hadid and Snohetta, and UN Studio and Coop Himmelblau. And also you worked on a prominence project, which is the Fondation Louis Vuitton by Frank Gehry, which is a famous Paris project by Frank Gehry. Then you joined the New York division as the director, where you headed a team of architects and designers. And I think focusing more on computer-aided design methodologies for building and construction. And then you also taught in several schools, such as the École Spatial Recognition in Paris and the University of Applied Arts here in Vienna. But then moving to certain measures, which I don't know in which year you co-founded it.
It's 3 years ago.
3 years ago, so still a young studio. Certain measures combines the different expertise of its founders, and it works across scales but also dimensions. And I think it has an understanding of design practice that is quite peculiar, since it includes experiences, systems, and spaces. And for each of these dimensions, the studio brings expertise in different forms. So from installations to happenings to videos to software to design methods to construction techniques, and also from specific design, from the interior scale to the urban scale and territorial scale. And so dealing with mathematics as much as robotics, as much as computer science, architecture and engineering, all of these procedures enter into certain measures work. The projects are interested in cartography of events, of shapes, of buildings, of concepts, of materials. And those cartographies are built through the quantitative embrace of plans and words, of data and images. Geography and history in those projects are reconfigured into spaces of affinity and similarities, so a different notion of space really, also into spaces of recurrence and frequency. It balances between complexity and energy, and it highlights differences and voids. And so it also highlights, let's say, known territories and unknown territories for new architectural adventures in what I think Verhaebelman would call the digital continent. So big data is definitely critical to the work, and as well as the necessity to develop custom tools. So I think you will be talking about this, because certain measures develops software, hardware, bots. You tap into open source programs too, so this allows to grasp somehow the problems before any type of formalization. So I think I will stop here, and I will ask you to join me in welcoming Tobias Nolte. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so, first of all, thank you very much for having me. What I want to be talking about, and I thought that the introduction was actually very interesting, and I might also switch around a couple of things, because or add a project in the end that's currently hidden in the presentation, but I might switch it on a little later. But really what I want to be talking about is experimental projects that we do at certain measures that really deal with kind of machine vision, computer vision, and its impact on design. What I want to do is really focus on these projects. We do other projects as well, but I think in order to really facilitate a more kind of focused conversation, I'm just going to pick the ones that really deal at this intersection of computer vision and design. Emmanuel mentioned earlier that we both, my business partner, Andrew Witt, who's currently an assistant professor at the GSD in Harvard and the co-founder of the Harvard Geometry Lab, we both worked for Geary Technologies for many times. And I just want to kind of give you a little bit of a flavor of where we came from and what kind of like the background is of our experience. So, this, for example, is so I don't know who is familiar with Geary Technologies. Just to give you kind of like a brief introduction, it was actually founded as a research and development unit within the architecture office of Frank Gehry. And he was essentially looking for help in designing and executing these kind of complex buildings that he designed. And he was looking in the aeronautics industry. And he found in a company called Dassault Systems a mechanical modeler called CATIA. And CATIA was designed and purpose-built for kind of like designing Boeing airplanes or Airbus airplanes. And so he brought this expertise into the office and started eventually developing software on top, basically on top of CATIA, which is called Digital Project. And then he hired people like myself who was, interested in computer coding, kind of like an above average understanding of geometry, but also trained as an architect and designer. So he hired people like us so there was a software development department, and then he hired people like us to actually worked in the software on projects mainly for Frank Gehry himself. He was essentially in the beginning our best client. And he was the one that kind of created all the problems that we were happy to solve. One of them was the Louis Vuitton Foundation in Paris, which, you name it, right? I mean, it's basically, 15,000 unique glass cylinders that needed to be kind of like, essentially you can't draw these things anymore, you need to code them. So it's basically both to design it, but also execute it. So we were able to work not only with the design side, but we were able to work with, the subcontractors and the fabricators of these elements. And, basically, calculating optimizations to fit glass cylinders on a free-form surface. But it was always this, like, we talk about the big plenty. It was always about, like, 15,000 unique elements, or, in this case, 22,000 unique elements. So, but essentially it was always like somebody created a problem, and Geary Technologies was kind of like happy to accept that complexity and to solve it. So this was a facade also at the Louis Vuitton Foundation out of fiber cement panels, a discretization of developable surfaces. But again, 20,000 unique pieces. And then, of course, like solving this entire kind of madness and puzzle of, of architectural elements in this really kind of like elaborate project. So, I oftentimes think of kind of like, there's like this sketch in the beginning, and our role was to kind of like, make it like kind of like quantify it, right? And this was kind of like the world we lived in. It was, there was a design, and then we helped facilitate the execution. And, after working with Frank Gehry, eventually we also started working for other architects because we gained a lot of kind of like experience in these complex projects. So one of them being Jean Nouvel, and we started working with Jean Nouvel and Beer Happold in very early stages of the design. Essentially the Louvre Abu Dhabi with these 10 layers of cladding, and every piece being unique, and how do you even start documenting that? So this was basically design development drawings that we produced for Jean Nouvel, basically describing the dome of the Louvre Abu Dhabi, and kind of annotation systems, automated annotation systems for every single element in that structure. We're talking about 100,000 unique pieces. And you basically, it just like went on and on and on. There were many other projects, you mentioned a couple of them, you in studio on this new project that they've recently done in Guangzhou called Raffles City. And these were then always the type of drawings that we would produce, kind of like describing a unique element, but in kind of these like shades. So it's not necessarily every element unique, but it's kind of like, you know, within certain parameters unique. So we did this for many years. Andrew eventually was the director of research at Geary Technologies, but we decided, you know, since we're both trained as architects and designers, that we wanted to, you know, stop consulting other people on how to design, and we thought we should kind of like fold it into our own design practice and started certain measures, which is based in Boston and in Berlin. And the, you know, it's, you know, we are 3 years old. We do a lot of, we do work in the context of kind of, weirdly enough, in the automotive industry. We do some projects with Audi and BMW, but the work that I'm going to be talking about is actually more, you know, for the Centre Pompidou's and Haus der Kultur in der Welt of this in this world. So I want to talk more about kind of like installation scale and more kind of like speculative design projects that we do. Also Ars Electronica, I will present the project in a little bit. And, you know, the idea is essentially this. That we thought, wouldn't it be interesting after working for so many years on designing projects in the beginning, and then like the question was always how to procure the project. So you have a design idea in the beginning, and then you kind of like ask yourself, where does the material come from? And what we thought to be kind of like a first speculative project was the idea, wouldn't it be interesting if you just looked at a pile of material and you would have like you would basically produce algorithms that would help you make sense of this material and suggest different, let's say, envelopes or different buildings, so to say, that you can build from it. So the first speculative project that we thought could be interesting is really kind of like on inverting this design process, and we called this project Mind the Scrap. So basically applying computer vision and kind of data science approaches to waste, kind of construction waste reuse. So, you know, or you could also say, like, you know, with Geary Technologies, we developed code to produce 22,000 unique facade panels. What if we were to have these 22,000 unique panels and have an algorithm suggest what other building you could have built from it? So, and we always like to, you know, kind of like describe it as this situation that everybody knows is essentially standing in front of a half-empty fridge, and you basically want to eat a sandwich, and you have an idea of a sandwich you want to eat, but the ingredients are not like really, you don't have the ingredients to build it. So eventually, what you need to do is you have this like idealized version of what you want, and then you have a material stock, and then you need essentially you need to mediate between what you have and what you want. So, you know, whatever. I mean, when you think about, you know, we looked at construction waste, particularly, and one subset of it, wood waste. So, you know, we have plenty of it. It's 35% of construction waste in the US alone comes from waste, comes from construction. And we looked at the subset of wood waste and found out that, you know, 1 billion linear feet of wood waste is technically reusable every year, but essentially ends up not being reused, but it's just ends up in landfill. So we thought, wouldn't it be interesting to essentially develop software that would allow not to kind of like recycle the wood, like the wood waste, but to leave it as it is and just redistribute, or like we call it like redistribute, or you reuse it. So the pieces remain the way how they are, but they just need to find the right location. And we thought, instead of having a material process, which is the one above, right, where you kind of like shred the pieces, you refragment them into standardized building components. We said let's try to replace the material process with a digital process. And at the risk of being extremely oversimplistic, we said recycling processes essentially add energy to something to minimize complexity, and we thought, couldn't we basically look with a very dispersed set of input to keep the complexity high and the energy input low. So, you know, I set out the project But we were then invited to give a presentation in the context of what's called the Forecast Festival at Haus der Kultur in der Welt, which is the House of World Culture in Berlin. And we said, wouldn't it be amazing to develop an experience that where you can experience, we always had like an algorithm at work, or you say, kind of make an experience of an algorithm. And we thought, okay, so how would we represent, or like what are the different steps that go into this project, into Mind the Scrap? And we said essentially in the beginning, it is all about scanning. So you have a diverse set of inputs, you scan them, and you kind of like categorize them. In the second step, you classify. So you have all of these different polygons, and you put them in different bins. They're L-shaped, S-shaped, whatever. And then the last thing is essentially building what we call a kind of a similarity tree, where you classify shape based on similarity. And then the fourth step of the algorithm is this mediation that I mentioned earlier. Like, you have an ideal version of a sandwich, and what are the ingredients that you have, and you need to mediate between the two. And our sandwich essentially was always a cube. So we wanted to always build a cube, and the algorithm essentially tried to resolve this problem of this is the target shape, but it doesn't have enough material, and it tries to find the best cube or the best sandwich it can build from the material. Oh yeah. Okay. Does that work? Maybe do you hear this? Yeah. So the idea was that we to basically create this experience in one really like very dark room. You entered the room, and then we projected essentially the 4 steps of the algorithm. The first one was, as I mentioned, scanning and classifying every single piece. So we created this like random set of polygons, and it starts classifying them. If the projector was like a little more high resolution, you would see all of these different kind of control elements in the interface. The second step was then about, you had all of these diverse sets of inputs, was about classifying them, right? I mean, like you first of all detect them using machine vision. You classify them based on graph type. So, is it L-shaped, I-shaped, U-shaped? And you put essentially the pieces in different bins. And in the middle part, you also do what's called kind of like an adjacency analysis. So, how would pieces actually fit together? The third step is what we call, basically building a similarity tree. So, which is then the search tree essentially for the fourth step. It starts with a seed point. Basically, it looks at one point and it compares it to every other element in the database. And the further away the elements are, the more unsimilar they are. So essentially, when you look for a particular shape, you would look at them. You can find the closest to your shape. And then the last one was really doing this mediation. In the beginning is the material stock you have at hand, and on the other end it's the target shape, which is the cube. And then it tries to build this cube, but it doesn't quite work, right? So we find it also kind of ironic in a way that the objects that like basically are being generated is, it really wants to be a cube, right? But it's like this like failed attempt, right? And it's this kind of like this play on kind of like free-form surface and can I say like building cubes and so that you basically look, I mean, like we really want to be this, but it just like didn't work out. And then essentially you need to imagine now. Sorry, I'm going to put that. So essentially you need to imagine now all of these pieces together in one synchronized projection and of like 15-meter length in this one dark space. So it is essentially what you saw one after another in the previous videos as just one big piece, and also this like crazy sound installation. Yeah, here you see it. So you entered the room, and again, we set out this project as being, what if you could create an experience of an algorithm, and you enter a dark room, and then you see really the algorithm at work. We worked with a London-based sound designer who essentially was a game designer, and he designed little bits of sound that we algorithmically triggered. So he designed, let's say, for one particular event, one particular sound, and then it would be triggered by basically particular events in the algorithm. So you could enter the space, and each unique soundtrack or like sound for a screen was basically under these respective screens projected from the back of the room, and you could walk through this kind of like audio-visual experience. And then these were kind of like the outcomes of these failed cubes. Yeah, like the best sandwich essentially you could get. This is just like one kind of like a little more immersive video where you are kind of like eye level. You could see a couple of anyways. So after this presentation, so we, in the first thing, and again, coming back to this idea that I set out in the beginning, to say, you don't start with necessarily the design intent, but you start with kind of classifying, thousands of unique pieces, and then have the computer help you kind of like make sense of them. The first step was really kind of like building an experience, and then we were invited at Ars Electronica to kind of develop this project further. And for Ars Electronica, we decided to actually build an interface. Emmanuel mentioned earlier that we, at certain measures, we don't necessarily develop software to kind of like a full version, but it's kind of like, we always call them provocative prototypes. And we said, we set out to do a user interface that allows you to deal with these kind of like vast sets of input data. And it has on the left hand side all of the kind of controls. So you set your desired form, in this case again a cube, and then you switch on the webcam feed. And what we did here is just like take wood waste or wood scrap pieces from the wood shop and place it in front of the camera, and it would detect the pieces and then build the internal database, which is on the right hand side. So you have now all these classified pieces. Essentially, what happens here is everything that you saw in the videos earlier is now happening kind of like on the inside. And then it basically makes sense. It tries to make sense of all of these unique pieces and tries to build a cube. Now, now currently this project kind of keeps going. We currently look at kind of the question how to build the database. So where do you actually, how do you build the initial database? So there's one project proposal that we did using photographs of pieces. I'm not going to go into this too much. That you essentially, the idea that you could source a building from local material, and basically the bigger the sourcing area gets, the closer you get to your desired shape, in this case a cube. But what we currently do is, these are all of the steps from collecting and scanning all the way to the completed structure. Currently we develop it further where we essentially really work from one data source, which is a small building that we scan, classify every single element in the building, and then we try to build a new structure from this database. Now, the project that I showed to you was, or this project is essentially applying machine vision to the problem of waste reuse. So, and to be perfectly honest, I wanted to say with this one, so far it has been kind of like more abstract because we deal with very abstract polygons. Essentially outlines, everything is flat, so it doesn't have a lot of depth to it. But in the next step that we currently work on, we want to work with a very advanced 3D scanning company that works in the lumber industry. So they scan trunks of trees to find the best orientation. Basically, they look inside through computer tomography scans to find the best, to basically classify structural capacity and also find the best position to cut up a tree. So we approached them and said, look, have you ever thought about kind of reclaimed wood and use your technology in the context of reclaimed wood? So we want to basically, what we want to do in the next step of the project, really make the materiality more tangible, because that's really the biggest problem. If you have material that doesn't come from a homogenized, standardized process, you won't find an engineer to sign it off. So it's basically what we want to do in this step is finding ways to reclassify wood waste, essentially. Well, so in this context, we applied machine vision and morphology analysis to scrap pieces. But what other place is there where you find an endless amount of unique polygons? And we decided to basically apply the same technique to the machine reading of plans. So you see, and essentially what we did was exactly this. So in this case, it's scanning New York and looking at all of the different building footprints. And you scan New York, you classify every single building footprint, and then apply the same morphology analysis to the buildings. Is it L-shaped, U-shaped? How similar is one footprint to another? We also did this to building sites, to read city plans for building sites and then classify them. And then you start with you scan, you organize, you analyze, and then you categorize the footprints. And what we apply, and this is really the metrics that we use to determine similarity. It's a 40-dimensional of 40 different parameters that combine decide whether or not something is similar. And then on the right-hand side, graph type, so whether or not something is I-shaped, L-shaped, U-shaped, you name it. And what we then started drawing are these, what we actually called this particular project, after Colin Rowe, we called it the robot. So we classify, in this case, I think Tokyo, or a neighborhood of Tokyo, all of the buildings. And we draw 4 maps. So these are not geographical maps of cities, but it's 4 maps based on shape similarity of the building footprints. And these are kind of self-organizing emergent maps where, here you find the longer, closer to eye-shaped buildings, and, the more squarish buildings are clustered in the top right corner. And then, obviously, we also thought it was beautiful. So we had like Tokyo. I think this is London, or a subset of London. We looked at Paris, and I don't know, something else. And then, we, on the one hand, we drew these just like pure maps, but then we also thought, wouldn't it be interesting to compare cities? So, Tokyo, we basically overlaid histograms of building types. Like, what's the distribution of building types in the city of Tokyo? And then also do statistics where now you don't really see it, but one category is like the squarish regular. So there are 19.9 squarish regular buildings in Tokyo. And as I mentioned, it is more about the overlay of different city, essentially the building stock in cities. And then, which is less interesting, but I just want to mention it. What we also started doing is what we call heat map arithmetic. So whatever geolocated data sets we could find, we also try to layer them into this model. So, whether or not it doesn't really matter. Whatever geolocated data that we had in a particular data format, we could actually visualize. Because what we decided to do, and you saw that also in Mind the Scrap, there was always a more kind of like artistic, kind of experimental version of the project. And then we try to build a software mockup. And in this case, we developed a software mockup that we called Spatial Recognition. Because essentially what we do, we apply kind of like facial recognition technology to the machine reading of plans. And we, we said, wouldn't it be amazing if I could search, if I had a visual search engine for plans? So on the top right, on the top left, you see the element for shape search. So this was basically you can draw a shape that you are interested in a city. The heat map layers, any kind of like geolocated data. So you can basically do mixed searches between metadata and also formal data. And then on the right-hand side, it reorganizes all of the buildings in the city, the building footprints, and based on your search. And as I mentioned, we called it a spatial recognition. So you load any kind of metadata. I find it less important, but you can basically just search for particular subsets. You can do combined searches, and then you draw a shape. And then it would, in this case, we look at something L-shaped. And on the right hand, then it reorganizes the data set, and then you can click and you find basically the buildings that are closest to your search. So we applied that to entire kind of cities, but at this point, and I'm being chronological here. At this point, we were asked to present at a conference on the future of air travel. And I called the organizer and was like, look, to be perfectly honest, I don't know anything about air travel or and the future of it, even less. What is going on here? Oh yeah. But the organizer was like, look, Tobias, I trust you guys will kind of like come up with a lecture at the symposium that could be interesting. So we had roughly a week, and what we decided to do was to basically what we applied to cities in spatial recognition. We thought that we thought of this idea of a building typology browser. So this idea that and then we thought that terminal buildings is probably a very small subset of buildings that you can say, look, and we found out there are roughly 10,000 terminal buildings on the planet. It's probably the only building typology that you could really kind of like grasp as a total, in its totality. So we found a data set of all airports in the world by geolocated, and we scraped Google Maps. We basically went to every single airport and took a picture of Google Maps. And in the first step, we thought, okay, well, there is a dominant color in all of these images that are a proxy for its location. So is it a desert airport? Is it kind of like close to the water? Is it in the snow? So we basically extracted all of these videos don't, yeah. We extracted the dominant color of each of these airports and created, we looked earlier at these similarity trees. We basically created what are called kind of color similarity trees. So you cluster all dark blue images in one area, and you cluster the more kind of like desert-like looking images in another corner. And we then organized and sorted all airports by color. As this like idea of a proxy for location. And this is just a different kind of like map. And then you could, because it's a so high resolution that we thought we needed to make it a little more clear by zooming into these similarity maps. So each image essentially being one airport, and then you can these like proxy maps, you can go and say, look, it goes from like all desert airports to the airports in the snow. The video is a little too slow. Anyways, this was kind of like the first, and to be perfectly honest, it's not a very kind of like scientific approach to airports when you present at a professional conference where there are people who actually build airports. When you tell them I sorted all airports by color. But I feel like the more critical thing here is actually something that's probably more interesting in kind of like an architectural discourse, because when I think of, for example, biology, and you're an expert in bugs, as you know exactly the boundary of your discipline because it's all bugs, right? So whenever something is not a bug anymore, it's not part of your domain, right? But certainly what you know is, in general, that there is a boundary to your domain. When you look at architecture, we are extremely precedent driven, right? So and this was also something that I said to the airport planners. When you design an airport, what you do is you look at precedents, right? You look at one, maybe you look at two, right? Or maybe you look at 4, right? And this is, again, I'm coming back to this idea of terminal buildings as a knowledge domain. You could eventually, and because we're not talking about housing or museums, you could eventually look at all airports, right? So this is it's more of a thought-provoking project than anything else. But what if we could draw a map of the typology of airport terminals? And so we did, and created a very similar map. And again, essentially applying the tools that we developed around computer vision and morphology analysis to not to the city, not to waste, but to actually a very particular building typology. And you know, since it was a conference on the future of terminal construction, I was like, well, look, I mean, you know, this is what terminal buildings in its totality sort of looks like. And the future might fall somewhere, you know, there. I mean, like, you know, again, you know, we're only talking about form, but as a thought-provoking thing, what if we would approach typology and architecture not through precedence, but through its totality in a way? Because, you know, what is, you know, there is a distinct number of terminals, and if the knowledge domain of terminal construction, if it's not a terminal, it's not part of your domain. Similar to the bugs. I need to check the time. Okay, I'm going to be, it's another 20 minutes, right? So maybe I talk for another 10 minutes and then we open it up.
We have half an hour. We have half an hour.
Okay. You know, because now I'm talking, so, you know, and then, you know, we actually went further, or like basically deeper, and also looked not only at building footprints, but essentially reading building plans. You know, and you basically, if you have like different plans, you know, what is the room structure? You know, what's the room size distribution? You can draw histograms of room size distribution and plan structures. So, you know, again, you know, kind of like going a layer, one layer deeper and looking at not only at building outlines, footprints, but moving deeper into the plan structure. And you know, now I'm actually showing, you know, because everything that I showed so far, you might think like, yeah, why would you do this, right? And I totally sympathize. But for example, we did a very, very short project with Doctors Without Border, and they have these super strict requirements of for hygiene in their plan structures to build temporary hospitals. And so this one, for example, being an operation room and the plan structure for an operation room. And then you have basically spatial organization and a logical organization. And we looked at very, very different plan structures that they specify in their requirements. And said, okay, well, you have very specific requirements, but they also have very idiosyncratic sites that they just, wherever they come, they need to kind of basically map their spatial organization onto an idiosyncratic site. So looking at plan structures on the one hand, and then on the other hand, look at basically potential sites. And you know, I didn't have slides for this, so I'm showing here different slides from a study that we did on the redevelopment potential in Berlin, and we looked at supermarkets. So we looked at kind of like the subset of all buildings in Berlin, but we only looked at supermarkets, and then like, you know, scanned them all, extracted them, and classified them, which is like more German supermarkets, I guess. Classified them, but then ultimately what you do, you have particular sites and you have a particular subset of sites, and you have a plan organization, and then you go basically through all of the different sites that you have at hand, and you kind of like you test and rate where would you fit that particular program the best. So essentially, you know, you specify all of the areas that you need. You specify plan structures that you need, and then the last one, you basically go through basically different sites, and you look at like where does this area distribution and spatial layout structure, where does it fit the best, and you start kind of classifying them. Another one is I'm basically showing now applications, right? So, you know, the beginning is kind of like we made it all searchable, and now kind of like what can you do with it? This is a company that we work with, is called Casita, and Casita builds essentially tiny houses. Like they have a bathroom, a little kitchen. In the US, they are referred to as ADUs. ADUs is called accessory dwelling units. And the accessory dwelling units is a mean, in particular in California, where they put great hope into for re-densification of Californian cities. So they liberated the permitting procedure for ADUs. So in LA, for example, you can, if you want to put this thing in your backyard, you can, essentially you are allowed to. You still need to do some sort of permitting, but they very rarely don't grant that permit. The city of LA even pays people if you host a homeless person in ADUs, because you might know, like a huge homeless problem in LA. And Casita is one of the companies out of Austin, Texas, that produces these prefab houses, and they want to sell them. And we met them, and they said, look, the potential of ADUs in California, nobody knows really what the potential is. Nobody knows. Like there are estimates of 5 million of these. Others say maybe 500,000. Nobody knows. So they approached us and asked, could we help them kind of dimension the market for ADUs in LA, and we did a subset of LA, like we did it in Santa Monica. So what we tested is the following. You have a very typical housing lot in Santa Monica. Looks terrible. It has a Tesla in front. And the algorithm now reads and basically checks, what can I find, like where's the backyard? What's the zoning envelope? It abstracts swimming pools and it abstracts trees, and then it checks what's left over, and then puts a casita and checks if it can fit a casita. And what we developed for them is a Google Map overlay, where you can literally look at it on your phone. These are the designated housing areas in Santa Monica, and from a kind of like far distance zoom level, you see basically if it works or not. These like light red ones, they can't fit a casita. The dark blue ones, they definitely fit a casita, and then the light blue ones would fit a casita if you get rid of your swimming pool. Nobody does that. And then you had like different zoom levels. So basically the zoom level kind of like basically yes or not, and then you zoom further in and you find actually the placement. So in the end, what we did, what we could tell the client was, I think out of 7,000 properties, we could, I think, like fit something like 2,600 something. So what was very critical for them was actually two things. For the first time, somebody could kind of like dimension the potential, let's say, in a subset of Santa Monica, but so be it. But it was also interesting for them because they are a venture-funded startup. They could go to investors and say, we know we have an idea of what the market is, and we have people that would help us dimension this further. And we also, we called this in other contexts. We call this we talk about these kind of projects as kind of like urban mining projects. But since urban mining has always a different meaning, we started calling this urban fracking, because when you think of like the the kind of like the pressure under which cities are these days to find really spaces. The whole competition for space in general is so strong that we felt kind of like urban fracking would be the right term to describe what we are trying to do. So we tried it here with tiny houses, but we have hopefully we have tested a couple of scenarios with, let's say, urban farms. So a company that does urban farming, they usually, the way how they do their business, they sit at the office and people call them. It's like, hey, I have an amazing roof. Can you check it out? But basically, what we propose to them is that, well, wouldn't it be amazing if we could kind of scan an entire city and we find the best fit for your technology? We essentially find the best roof for you. So you really invert the whole kind of like business process of that particular company. Yeah, so another one, I don't know, I feel I might want to show one. No, I'm going to show this project. But it's now a little kind of like conceptually it's a slightly different because what we earlier talked about is obviously really kind of like computer vision computer vision and morphology analysis to handle these vast data sets of, let's say, city maps or waste material. This project is was another exhibition that we did. It's a very small project, but what we tried to do here is we were invited at the Boston Society of Architects to visualize the history of inflatable structures. And we developed this interface for them where we used Ngram data, Google Ngram data, to visualize, basically have an interactive installation to visualize the history of inflatables. And I'm probably just jumped to so you had a timeline from 1700 to today, and there's basically the frequency of particular terms in books since 1700, and when they come up, when particular terms come up, and then we looked also, so basically the whole the Google Ngram data visualized, and then we looked at particular world events and architectural events. So you could then kind of interactively browse the history of inflatables. You could, with a kind of, was just like a knob interface, and then you could have detailed views. And I show you. Oh, we don't need this music. So again, kind of like to applying kind of like big data analytics to a kind of like an architecture history problem. So we call it chronorhythm. From 1700 to 2017, all entries and particular terms that we looked for, and then all of the Ngram data over time. You could have either world events or architectural events that you could basically browse through and then click on a particular one. So you had detailed events. And we had just like a control knob. It was a very simple interface. It's just like you scroll through and you can select things. So you essentially entered there were a couple of pieces, obviously, in the exhibition, but at the very entrance, you could, first of all, just kind of like browse the history before you entered the exhibition. I think I'm going to end here. Thank you very much.
Thank Like last time, we're gonna take questions.
Please.
So,
I just wanted to ask if where can I find more information about it? Like, what should I Google tomorrow or today in the evening?
You know, first of all, you should follow us on Instagram. And then also on the, you'll find it on our website.
Okay.
The website is certainmeasures.com and at certainmeasures.
But what's your question?
What about like some resources when I can find more information about some other applications of these technologies, of these algorithms, like that?
Can you repeat the question?
Sorry. Do you know some, maybe you can recommend some resources then where I can find information about some other applications of these technologies?
I would have to think about that.
Okay.
But you can also send me an email.
Okay, cool. I will. Thank you.
maybe one thing would be just to list really quickly a couple of the strategies you use. You mentioned Google's ngraph.
Yeah, but like this is, we, for example, in the context of the waste reuse project, I mean, we use basically whatever data we can find. I mean, some of the projects are based on OpenStreetMap. For the Santa Monica project, we had higher fidelity data. For the web, basically the webcam feed to detect the material, we use different, partly open source, but partly our own technology. But it's really kind of like whatever we can get our hands on. It's really the answer.
We start.
Yeah, there are plenty.
Have you thought about making a worldwide database about this wood materials? I mean, if you make a worldwide database with all of these materials, it would certainly make a cube. And you
Yeah,
can
exactly.
make many more
That's the funny thing. Yeah. More look. I mean, obviously the end game. So when you look at the state of the project, the reason why it starts with scanning is because we don't have yet a database, right? But when you, for example, the end game of a project like this would really be basically consider buildings as a temporary state of matter, right? So you whenever you build a new building, you'd kind of like take different material and reuse it. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the IPv6 address space in for kind of like IP addresses, right? So last year we ran out of the IPv4 address space. We ran out of addresses essentially. So we implemented v6, and the address space of v6 is so big that essentially you could connect every single red blood cell of your body to the internet with a unique IP. So this idea that we currently we could potentially imagine a future where literally every object in the world is addressable. So and when you think about that, and then kind of like this idea of like temporary state of matter. I'm just saying, this could be the end game. The database of all material, essentially.
That was my question, thank you.
Can you?
My question was, how exactly can you scan the things? I mean, can you detect if a roof is horizontal or not? Or can you just know there is a building? And can you also, detect ecosystems or what species the tree is? Is this possible or not?
Well, I mean, you know, I mean, like, the disclaimer I said at the beginning, like, some of these projects are kind of like still in a very experimental stage. You know, we try to move things forward. In the very beginning, it was essentially a random set of polygons, right, for the wood scanning, for the waste scanning project. You know, obviously, in the next step, we really want to go and find partners to what I mentioned that earlier, to actually reclassify wood based on structural capacity, for example, right? And we haven't the technology is used in the lumber industry to really look on the inside look into the inside of a wood trunk. So, you know, the question is kind of like, you know, does it make sense? You know, how expensive is it really? It is very much in a experimental stage. So, particularly the material scanning part.
Maybe just in reaction to this, I'd like to pick this up for a moment because it beautifully perhaps illustrates these distinctions I was trying to talk about. Because the question of, so can we make one big database of everything? So it's very intriguing when you start to actually think about identifying ecosystems. Because on the level of these kinds of instances, you cannot even say what is one organism. Most of the organisms actually live through parasiting systems that coexist with them. And so what is quite fascinating with this enormous endless space that is opening up. Your last example is the IP addresses, beautifully illustrated. Yeah? So there is plenty of space for all these kinds of indexes and for virtualizing them. But the analysis always only works with regard to that which is already formally describable. So like your examples with the floor plans and so on. So whatever we have as a format, we can virtualize it. And the question that between the distinction stochastic, statistics, probabilistics has a lot to do with how do we elementarize things such that we can describe them formally, such that we can then regard it as a kind of raw material and be synthetic, so be projective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a question.
Going back to your project on the future of air travel, have you considered finding and fabricating an average form of all the, like every terminal in existence?
No, I mean, no, we haven't. I mean, it could be it could be interesting to say what's the most average airport. I don't know, but we haven't really done it. We were really with this project, which was a very kind of like it was more around kind of like, you know, mapping existing airports based on similarity, but we didn't really go further than this.
Other questions? Yeah? Okay, we have a line of...
So I guess I have a pretty general type of question. How do you actually begin to work with this kind of content, but not only like consume this content now, like we are doing in the lecture? How do you start? What's the path to doing
Yeah,
this?
like, why are we doing this?
No, not why. How? So how do you get to doing this?
No, so you know, we also have paying clients, right? But what we do, it's when we set up the company, we always thought that we should be. Oh, thank you so much. We always we struggled to define what we really do because we are not a really architecture company, you know. So eventually, Andrew and I, we at one point said, what if we are just kind of like an incubator of good ideas? And we have paying clients, and this is really usually what happens. We have basically hypothetical projects that usually start with a one-pager where we describe, let's say, you know, wouldn't it be interesting if, you know, and then if there is an opportunity such as the Forecast Festival, we submit these ideas, but they always have a very clear the context of an installation or exhibition, we develop them further. So we have a kind of like a stock of these initial ideas, and then if we work for clients, I mentioned for example Audi. Then we're all hands on deck on these projects. But then when there is a downtime, then we just take one of these projects and try to move it forward. And that's how also we essentially, it's basically private. It's like our funded research.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Do you see some sort of duty or some job in social terms with what you do? Because what you do, you talk about urban fracking. I think that's a very good term because the tools you are inventing, as I see them, you could use them for either good or either bad. And you
Yeah,
could
of course.
really frack land.
Mm-hmm.
Capitalize that, and do you see some sort of job of or need to protect what you're doing? Do you think about that, or is it just in a state where it's not necessary?
Well, you're probably totally right. You could be more careful. To talk about particular things, but like that's not really what we too worried about. I think this whole body around kind of these thoughts around how does computer vision change the way how we design and how we really can dimension a problem is not really new, right? I mean, when you think about the invention of the microscope or the telescope, right? It's like basically augmented vision. I feel like computer vision falls into this category, right? It changed the way how we looked at the world, and it is still kind of like not very clear, obviously, to us, like how this changes the way how we design. But you need to see these projects in this context, I would say. Kind of like design experimentation at the intersection of computer vision and design.
Where do you find the construction waste?
At the very beginning, it was really just random polygons, right? It was a very extreme abstraction. What we do now in kind of like the third iteration of this project, which we will do for the House of Future in Berlin. This is where we in this step of the project, we're literally going to take down a small building in every single piece. And then basically, because what has been always very unclear, and this is where your question comes from, is kind of like, where does the material come from, right? One iteration, it's like wood waste in the wood shop at the GSD, right? But it's still kind of like very nicely cut wood, right? So what we want to do now is literally take down a small building in every single bits and pieces and start scanning them and build this material database. That's fine.
So perhaps because we have this theme now of quantity, look bigger. We have different studios, and we have a set of 3 questions that, if there is time, we would like to ask everyone of our guests. So they have to do with our interest with setting up the course like this is, of course, on the one hand, to introduce practicing architects, to introduce their fascinations, their interests, and also to stigmatize challenges today. Now, and obviously, it's enormous what the computer allows us to do, how we think about things. So we are on several levels interested in what you think is important. So the questions are, one of them is, what are key inspirations for your work? Like, do you see to be continuing a kind of line of thinking, or it must not necessarily be architecture, or perhaps it's auto car industry, or perhaps it's design, or perhaps it's I don't, so in any open sense. Then the second one, what would you say are key challenges to architecture today? Like,
can I write the answers?
Yeah, of course. So, if you want.
And the third question?
And the third question would be, this is more an educational kind of question. So, these are our first-year bachelor students becoming architects. What would you say to a young generation? What do you need to pay attention to? What are important factors that maybe are underrepresented in magazines or in discourses? So what are important themes? We call this, what dishes would you put on the table if you were having a dinner where you want to share certain insights? So these are our three questions. They're very open, and you're very welcome, of course, to address also retrospectively. We will collect it. Perhaps 1 or 2 points you could say something spontaneously.
Inspiration.
Key challenges.
Key challenges.
And education. What is important to pay notice, to take into account? I mean, the third question in many ways was already in your presentation, so we had a lot of answers to that.
Well, I mean, I feel a little, I feel like a little on the spot. And this is where always the worst moment, because then you usually say something very generic, which I highly want to avoid. But I think but this is not very particular to architecture, but this the capacity, or the ongoing challenge of artificial intelligence is, to me, something that is really mind-boggling, and because we don't really know what is going to happen with these kinds of technologies, and also in the context of architecture and design. So I would really feel, I mean, it's not a really, I feel like this is a core challenge to really, it's not only to our discipline, but really to society, I almost. And then, and this is really something very generic, but I think if it's gonna the times are so unclear where things are going, I think what's and this is really something very generic that I think is important to say to a younger generation is, and I felt that in the way how Andrew and I pursued the things that we wanted to do, because the question was why are you doing this? Certainly nobody pays for it, but to kind of have, if you have a particular fascination that might make sense for you, but to really pursue these things, because ultimately, if you don't do that, then I feel like you are not. I would always encourage to pursue these ideas rather than to think about is it going to be useful or not, but to really kind of pursue these these ideas, because I feel like these are the ones that really eventually are cannot lead you anywhere. That's really what I guess as a comment to these questions.
Yeah, nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there another question? And there is one. Okay, and then we come to a close.
Hi. So my question might be a little bit absurd, but from what you're working on, the machine vision and design, is it then not kind of unnecessary for all of us to study architecture? if sooner or later machine vision is going to take over?
No, not at all. I mean, really, I mean, I would clearly say no. I mean, it's the like basically what I want to, and you know, I didn't want that this impression would come up. It is really about, and you know, raising the question and I mentioned that earlier with the microscope and the telescope, right? It's an augmented form of vision, but still, you know, that doesn't make you as a designer obsolete at all. It just like allows you to, you know, as an example, when we talked about the airports, right? We approach typology and architecture always through precedents, but you know, what if computer vision could allow us to really dimension the kind of like solution space in a totally different way, rather than through precedents to, you know, understand a particular typology in a more kind of like complete way. So I would say, you know, it doesn't change anything about the role. It doesn't fundamentally change the role of the designer, because you would still, it's basically just ways that allow you to augment your vision.
Are we, yeah?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.